majority of people talk about dyslexia as a disability. And then there is a large sort of minority of people that are starting to talk about it as a superpower. And what I wanted to do is say it's probably neither, actually. Having dyslexia is an Achilles heel every day. And I hid my dyslexia on the basis of nobody would want to do business with me if they found me out.
A pivotal job in my career, I lied about having a degree.
Nobody ever checks them. I've employed over 5,000 people in my life. I don't know if I've ever asked to see. I can categorically tell you, I've never asked to see someone's evidence of their qualification.
Without passion and purpose, I think we're of no use, and we're dangerous to ourselves and to others.
When I sold my first business, I set up an investment fund, and one of the first businesses I ever looked at was OnlyFans.
If I died, I've had a blast of a life.
Yeah.
And I would rather die fully living than live having never lived.
He said, Laura, I'm 66. I've got grandchildren. I've achieved everything I want to achieve in life. If I blow up in space, what a great way to have gone.
Welcome back to another episode of Success is a System. We're joined today by Jamie Waller, who has just released a book, The Dyslexic Edge, and we're going to get into that, talk about Jamie's story and whatever comes up along the way. Remember, Success is a System is all about learning from people who have had different challenges in whatever sector they're in and talking about the systems that they use to overcome them, the behaviors that they used to overcome them. I benefit from meeting many great people, very few of which had an easy ride. And it's overcoming those things and using systems that makes the biggest difference in people's stories. So welcome, Jamie.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, I'm really pleased to be here.
It's lovely to have you here, and particularly interested in the Dyslexic Edge. And just before we started filming, as I mentioned, we did do an episode with Neville Wright, who built Kiddie Care, sold that, now is a centimillionaire a couple of times over, a very successful guy. And it was interesting to me to see that you'd written a book that specifically highlighted that issue. Neville had written a book called How I Went from £1 to 100 million, but didn't in the book he mentions it, but to bring it straight out there must be a breath of fresh air for people who are, I won't say suffered or challenged with, because it can be a superpower. But I want to know about that. But firstly, give us a kind of whirlwind. Who is Jamie Waller? Where did you grow up? What experiences did you have? What were standout moments in your upbringing? What were good, bad, and ugly pivot points for you?
Well, brilliant. So I'm Jamie Waller. I'm an entrepreneur. So I was born in East London, in Bethnal Green. This was before, people used to walk around in Havianas and carry iPads. This is when Bethnal Green was still toe-cap boots and people came home with coal on their face. Jeez. But it was a great upbringing. Bethnal Green, right on the fringe of the city. Everyone were market traders, borough boys. So it was a great place to grow up. But I grew up in a 2-bedroom flat above a shop where both my parents still resided up until the day they died. But I was born dyslexic with ADHD, colorblind and poor. Wow. So I had to get going out of the gates quite early in life. And, like all entrepreneurs, there's loads of stories about sort of selling stuff as a child and stuff like that. But my real breakthrough was age 5. My mum took me to a local fete in Hackney at London Fields. And there was a motorcycle team putting on a display called the Imps Motorcycle Display Team. And I was 5, seeing these motorbikes with these kids riding them. And I said to my mum, I want to do this. And my mum took herself off, asked about it. And just by chance, we were talking about luck just before we started to record. The Imps was a motorcycle boys team for disadvantaged children from East London. So I had to apply. I went on a selection course. About 8 months later, I was given a position. I spent 11 years in that motorcycle team. So while I was growing up at home, Mum was having a tough time. Dad was an alcoholic. There was lots of violence at home. Bethnal Green was rough. Every weekend, I got to go away and put on displays at county shows up and down the country. And I got to hang out with 40 boys that were just like me. And a respite. So my mum saw it as a respite from home. She never had the confidence to leave Dad, and it didn't have the financial ability to either. Yeah. Dad was a bit of an arse, but he always worked. He always brought home a paycheck every week, put it on the table, and made sure we had a roof over our head and food on the table. So I was getting away every weekend, and what that taught me were 2 main things, really. One, that there was more to life than what you could see in Bethnal Green. You know, because we would drive off out of London on the Marylebone Road, and you'd see big houses. You'll see houses with driveways with cars on them, and you'd go, oh, okay, there's more to this than what I'm witnessing.
So it expanded your horizons.
Exactly. And then the second thing was risk-taking. You know, I learned to ride a motorbike age 5. At age 11, I could ride one backwards. Age 13, I could jump them through fire. Age 14, I could jump them over cars. So this sort of desire for risk-taking was always there.
Well, and I think if we don't, if we play safe, we may never be hurt, but we'll also never be successful.
Yeah.
But I want to jump straight back into some of that. You said about dyslexic, ADHD, and so on, and I'm always interested in how those superpowers. I mean, some people talking about disabilities, but my mum taught me early on that people aren't disabled, they're differently abled, and if they can reframe that in their brain, it can take them to different possibilities. But were you aware that you were dyslexic ADHD? When was you diagnosed, or were you aware that you were just a bit different? Did your mum understand that? Your dad see that?
Yeah.
When did you get this awareness that you were a little bit different?
Well, it's interesting. So I always knew, I knew from age 7 or 8. So in primary school, you go from sort of getting congratulated and certificates for turning up, eating well, being a good friend. And then age 8, the school system changes to start rewarding you on your education ability. So I knew from about then that I was different, but I genuinely just thought that I wasn't able. You know, I was less able than these people. I couldn't get it. And you're told at that age that you're just not very clever, you're stupid, and you believe it.
Yeah.
And it was really tough though, because, you know, the friends that I had in primary school were all doing really well. And when I started to slip behind, I started to become a bit of a recluse, and I was like, well, hang on a second. Then I didn't get to go to the secondary school I wanted to go to. So I ended up in a really rough secondary school in Bethnal Green. I remember I turned up all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to learn. And then I walked in the gates and I thought, wow, Jesus, this is going to be a steep learning curve.
Yeah.
And then I went quite quickly to being bullied, and then I went from being bullied to being the bully, and then I just stopped going to school, and then I left school before sitting any GCSEs because I simply was so far behind then. I spent about 14 months out of the school system in the secondary school years. And you can't catch up. I mean, I'm dyslexic anyway, but I couldn't catch up. But dyslexia wasn't really a thing then. They weren't helping people with dyslexia. You were just simply put into a different class, dragged out of class.
You were different and slow.
Yeah, so my teachers would say things like, look, if you're not going to bother trying, don't turn up. So guess what you do? You don't turn up, right?
Yeah, because the inference in that statement is that you weren't trying.
Yeah, it's
and you could have been trying, but they were teaching you wrong for your learning style.
Exactly. So I guess I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. And then as you got a bit older, I realised. I mean, I set up my first business. You spoke about Neville there with, you know, similarity. I started in window cleaning too, and then into car sales. But I always knew I had to work for myself because getting a job was going to be difficult. But I always disguised it. I always disguised my dyslexia. I didn't want to be found out because I was a Cockney boy. I spoke with a Cockney accent. I had dyslexia, but I wanted to do well in business. So I started to change the way I speak. The way I speak today isn't the way I spoke age 16. I purposefully taught myself how to speak different. I changed my name from Jamie to James, and I hid my dyslexia on the basis of nobody would want to do business with me if they found me out. And it was only when I was 36 I sold my first business for upwards of 40 million quid, which I owned wholeheartedly myself, that I had the confidence to go, actually, maybe I am. But how dyslexia diagnosis came around is when I sold my first business, I thought I wanted to do an MBA. Because I'd done an exec education program.
Because the world says intelligent people are better people or get more recognition.
Exactly. So I signed up for an MBA, but I thought if I'm going to do an MBA, I only want to do one of the best universities in the world. So I applied to Harvard, Stanford, and London Business School. And I had to do this application saying, look, I don't even have a GCSE. And I know this is a post-grad course, but wouldn't it be great for your brand if you took someone like me and gave them an MBA? And Harvard ignored us, Stanford responded, LBS responded. After my interview with LBS, they said, do you think you could be dyslexic? Oh. And I froze because I thought, no.
They're going to say no because
they found me out, right? So I said, no, definitely not. Then they said, would you be willing to set the test? So I said, yeah. So I sat the test. I really tried hard to pass the test, by the way, because I was incentivized to not be found out. Yeah. But it came back, I was dyslexic. I got given a place on the course anyway, so hats off to LBS. No GCSE, dyslexic gave me a place on the course. But ultimately, 3 months into it was far too difficult for me, and I dropped out.
But I want to pick up on that because listen, I don't mind saying now, and it's water under the bridge. But a pivotal job in my career, I lied about having a degree. I mean, literally, I'd worked in jobs and I'd been promoted. A great skill set, and I was achieving incredible results for the businesses I worked with. But then the job I really wanted, which was to be country manager running a whole retail network with an oil company, I saw the job and I thought, I could fucking smash that. And I knew I could because I was already doing it elsewhere. But it was graduate level entry.
Yeah.
And I remember going along for the interview. I got on like a house on fire with the guy who ran the department and whatever. And then I got offered the job. And of course, the offer letter says, bring your certifications or whatever with you. I'm like, So I just said, look, I'm not interested, thanks. Anyway, this guy rings me, fair play to him. He was a Chesham boy. And he says, all right, Mike. I said, yeah. And he said, what the fuck's going on then? And I said, oh, what do you mean? He said, I thought we got on well. He said, and I said, I did. We did. And he said, well, I thought you wanted this job. I said, I would love it, but I'll be really honest, Mike. I lied on the application. Why the fuck did you do that? And I said, well, because I know I could do that job. I can run rings around anyone else who applied. You know I can evidence that I can. But the thing said this, he said, oh, fuck that. He said, can you start a week on Monday and leave HR to me? And if you don't just take that risk sometimes, if you don't apply anyway, if you ask the question, they say no, next. But, you may have, there's every chance that you could have gone for that and just not even gone for the test because you didn't want to be outed. Because you assumed that would say you were less, you were not good enough. And so, I'm sure you'd agree if I say to people, whatever you think is a restriction is only a restriction if you allow it to be a restriction. It may be a different ability, but it's only a disability if you see it, acknowledge it, and act as if it's a disability. Do not let that stop you from chasing your dreams. And I think so many people do.
Oh, absolutely. And going back to your sort of CV and application thing, 50% of people when they leave education, if they've not got what they wanted to, lie in some way on their CVs. Nobody ever checks them. I've employed over 5,000 people in my life. I don't know if I've ever asked to see. I can categorically tell you, I've never asked to see someone's evidence of their qualifications. I've just trusted, because the CV just gets you through the door, right? It's once you've then bought into the person, you forget about the CV. You're buying into what they've got.
100%. And that's a great point. People do business with people.
Yeah.
Not CVs, not paper, not degrees. But sadly, we do live in a world where it's necessary to tick some of these boxes. But you did your MBA. You thought that would get you some massive recognition, did you? Or what was the good, bad and ugly of doing that?
Well, I guess, so I only lasted a couple of months to about 10 weeks. I guess I was petrified of becoming unemployed. I was 36.
Even though you never needed to worry about money?
Yeah, of course, because I grew up with nothing. And I thought all I wanted was to be rich. And then when I woke up that morning and the money hit the bank account, I was like, it was quite a funny day because my wife, who's now my wife, my girlfriend at the time, woke up next to me and she said, I got home, like all good deals happens at 7 o'clock in the morning, up all night. So I went back to bed until 9:30 or something. I woke up and she said, so what are we going to do to celebrate? And I was like, I don't really know. So let's go to Bethnal Green, have some pie mash. Anybody from East London will know it's very important to us to serve some pie mash. And she's like, pie mash? I'm like, yeah. So we drove off to Bethnal Green, had some pie mash, went for a walk that afternoon, and I was lost because I'd lost my purpose overnight, right? My purpose from being sort of age 5 or 6 was to not be poor. And then when all of a sudden I wasn't poor, I was like, okay, well, what next? I'll do an MBA. And now, when I started my MBA, 6 days after selling my first business, I set up my second. So before I got through the door of LBS, I'd already set up another business. And so LBS was difficult. It was time consuming. It was a pain in the arse. I'd already set up another business. I thought, leave it. I set up that business. I ran that for a year and sold that. And then I've got another 2 businesses now. You just keep... My purpose is business. I'm the startup guy. I love it. I love starting and creating.
I absolutely resonate. And whether you know it or not, there are lots of... cross points in our backgrounds, in the sense that I too had a single mum who then got she was single in the sense yours wasn't, but mine had an abusive step dad or new partner who for some reason hated me. I therefore didn't like him because he was violent and so on. And it wasn't until you said when you were talking about your father, but he always brought a paycheck back. And, this guy was there. He did turn up. He was there for my mother, and he died of cancer. And to be honest, I was glad he died when he died, because he was not a nice bloke.
Yeah.
But then I looked back and thought, you know what? We were feral kids, and he was there. We weren't his kids. One of my brothers was, but we didn't distinguish any difference in that. But he was there, and actually, I wouldn't change a bloody day, because I'd be scared that would change something about me and who I am. But that gave me drive. I built a business here in America, Australia, New Zealand. And then when I exited that after doing Secret Millionaire, similarly, I thought I didn't need to work again. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to do anything. I was kind of a bit burnt out. I lasted about 9 months, and then I realized that what I do, who I am, finding that you said purpose, but I think it's passion and purpose. I think human beings are dangerous without passion and purpose, but with passion and purpose, we're unstoppable. And so what I tend to say to people, if they say, I'm going to give up, I'm going to retire, I think, shit, I tried that at 46. That doesn't work. That is actually not good for you. And equally, if people don't feel there's passion or purpose in the jobs they're doing or the business they're in, change it.
Yeah.
We are not a tree. We haven't got roots. We got legs. We can move. We can change it. Because without passion and purpose, I think we're of no use, and we're dangerous to ourselves and to others. And so, thanks for sharing that. And then your point about, what do I do? We've done 2 podcasts with Kevin Byrne, who was a drug addict living in his car, selling drugs and whatever, sold for 76 million quid. And he said, even on the journey home from London where they signed the deal, he said him and his wife were sort of silent. They just didn't speak. And he woke up the next morning and he rang Richard Harpin and said, I want to buy it back. And Richard said, I'm sorry, I've been after this for a long time. And it paid 50% more for the business. Yeah. It was valued. But and then for a long time, Kevin felt lost. And now he's found new purpose and he's driving. You can see, even between the 2 podcasts we did, which were about 8 months apart, there's a new light in his eye, And so I'd say to people, don't think of ever stopping. Maybe stop doing something that isn't serving you. Yeah. But always look for your passion, your purpose, and follow that, because it not only brings great rewards, it brings you to life.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I mean, actually, when I thought about doing a second book, and this was my second book, the other title I had in mind was Life After Exit, which was, we all plan so well for the exit. We go and get advisors, M&A people, financial people, lawyers, but nobody ever plans themselves. And my father-in-law, for example, was the FD at GSK. He retired early, but 18 months before retirement, they gave him a retirement coach. And he has had the most successful retirement I've ever known. He's been retired now for 15 years. He took up golf. He took up traveling. He's never here. He's so happy, but hardly anybody else gets it right. So there is something in that about taking the time to plan for it. So I don't know.
And but it sounds like he had a passion and a purpose in those things.
Well, I'm not too sure he did. I think he was just told quite early on, okay, so it's great. You want to retire early? Why do you want to retire early? And he said, well, both my parents died young. I want to take this opportunity. And they said, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. And they sat down with plain pieces of paper and worked it out. He'd never really played golf in his life. So, but, so I don't know. I think for myself personally, retirement would be terrible. But I think some people can retire. They just need to retire successfully. They need to plan it. They need to be prepared for it. And not everybody has the luxury of getting a coach to help them do that, obviously. But I thought there should be books written about this. There should be a book about this.
It sounds like a great book.
Yeah.
Maybe you should call it Lexit, Life After Exit. But picking up on 2 of the points you made in the last 5 minutes, one of my main mentors, I'm assuming that therefore there's some level of support or understanding of the benefits of coaching or mentoring, but one of my main mentors, he was a turnaround king, and then eventually became the head of corporate restructuring for KPMG, and amazing guy. But he would turn a business round and he'd earn well while he was doing that, and then he'd get a £2 million bonus, a £4 million bonus, and he never had the need for money. He said, but I'd finish the job, I'd do the deal, it'd be sold or it'd be repackaged or floated and so on, and he would move on to the next challenge. He said, but whenever he lost that job, albeit that was the date they were aiming for, he said he'd have a day or so and then he would panic. I need to do something. And he used to get coaches then, and they were like personal branding coaches. And one of the things he said they say to you is everything you do is either going to build your brand or damage your brand. There is no in between. And so he said what had happened though is he said, let's say my rate at the time was £800,000 a year with a win bonus if I achieve. He said I'd see a job and it'd be £350,000 and I'd think, wow, that's good. It's better than nothing and I need to earn something. I need to do something. And then these guys, because he'd take them on at the end of each job, would say, how's that going to help the brand?
Yeah.
I won't say his name in case he didn't share it, but of you. And he said, well, yeah, but there's no but. It's either going to build your brand or it's going to damage your brand. And we need to be really careful about that. Now, to me, a coach, a mentor can see what the person can't see, which is why I can be the fastest runner in the world, but I still want a coach or a mentor because they can watch what I'm doing. They can observe from the outside without the passion, without the emotion, without the distraction of what might be going on in my life. They are impersonal in that sense, but they care. And so having that person that can ask you the questions that makes you think what you wouldn't think or consider what you might not have considered, and to see what maybe your strengths, your weaknesses, your superpowers is life-changing. But still many people don't appreciate or understand or even consider the value that a mentor or coach can bring. They just look at the cost.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've had coaches and mentors my entire life. So, you don't need to convince me. Although, I guess one problem with the rise of social media and that ability for people just to talk openly to large audiences is that with that, and the coaching world in particular, I see, we've had a complete influx of coaches, right? So 10 years ago, it was property. Everyone wanted to be a property developer.
Yeah.
Now everyone wants to be a coach. And there are, without doubt, good coaches and bad coaches. And I think some people have maybe paid low because that's what they could afford and had bad experiences. Some people have paid high and had great experiences. Some people have not paid at all. I mean, some of the best mentors I've had in my life I haven't paid for at all. But we all need those people, right? We needed our parents. We needed that North Star of our parents when we were growing up.
Well, and I guess the team that were training you in the imps from a young age, it's about goal setting, it's about training, it's about focus.
Yeah. But this, this whole thing about protecting your brand, of course, it's really important is what job you do. I mean, one of the early opportunities I was sent, so when I sold my first business, I set up an investment fund. And one of the first businesses I ever looked at was OnlyFans. And I was sent the documentation. It was by invite. And I looked at it and I was like, this is going to be huge.
Yeah.
But I'd had 2 daughters in the last 2 years.
So
morally, I said, I can't do it. It's going to be huge. And I won't lie. I did think, could I do it through a trust? Could I do it in a way? Because the
bit like the cancer charities investing in tobacco companies.
Yeah, exactly. And I did. And then I thought, no, Jamie, if there's a time to take a moral stance, is when you have two young girls in the other room. And I took a stance. And my first investment ended up being Deliciously Ella protein balls in Starbucks. Yeah. But it just goes to show you the difference. Now, I made some money off Deliciously Ella, but I certainly didn't make what I would have made off OnlyFans. But that would have, if I was known as an early investor in OnlyFans, it would have carried with me today, and I might have not got the opportunity to spend some time with Richard Branson and write the book, for example, and strike up a friendship with some of those people. So,
and it's interesting because you see some of these debates though with OnlyFans and that kind of thing in mind. And I've got 2 daughters as well, 21 and 25. I'd have that same dilemma. I've never invested in anything like that, but some of those people would say, they're in control, they're liberating themselves. I mean, it does need to be a personal, it's like, I love the saying, there's no softer pillow than a clear conscience. Whether it's right, wrong, personal opinion, global opinion, it's, can you live with it?
Yeah.
Does it feel right to you? Yeah. And to me, it's always, if it doesn't feel right, there's no softer pillow than a clear conscience.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not here preaching against, some people say you shouldn't invest in gambling, you shouldn't invest in this. I mean, you're right. It's about you and your conscience. For me, it was having 2 daughters. I, for whatever reason, came to the conclusion that platform would enable people to not have to try hard enough. It might be an enabler of people taking the easy way out to access funds. That was my opinion, and it's an opinion that I stand by, and I didn't.
And it may not be long lasting for them, and
exactly.
How old are your daughters of interest?
7 and 8.
Oh wow, what a lovely age.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And talking about mentors and stuff, I mean, I know it's cliche to say this, but they really play such a pivotal part of my life right now. Of a weekend, I've got this in my head. Every weekend I enter the weekend going, they are going to be my mentors this weekend. They are going to mentor me to play more, be more playful. You know, whenever they ask, Daddy, would you play? As long as, I've got this rule. If they ask me to play anything that's a board game, chess, battleships or anything, I never say no. If they want me to roll around on the floor, never say no. If they're saying, Daddy, can you go and watch a movie? I'll say, you watch a movie, I'll do this. But if it's physical one-on-one time together or two-on-one time with them, then I try never to say no, and it's just delightful.
I love that, although I couldn't do the board game thing because I could never let myself let them win. And of course that would end in tears, although now they try and get me back in, and now the fear is they're better than me at things like Scrabble, Monopoly.
Exactly, but to be honest, it doesn't take it long before they do.
They're not going to let me win.
They do win, so yeah, and you've got no control over it. I mean, their brains are little sponges at that age. Right?
Well, I mean, I can see that, we're going to need more than one podcast, and we'll have to follow up at some point, because I do want to get onto your book, The Dyslexic Edge. Straight there, it is what it says on the tin, very Ronseal, no hiding, bringing it out. You had some amazing contributors, and just the other day I saw a post where Theopathetis was talking about contributing in the book. Tell us about the book. What was the point where you thought, yes, fuck it, I'm going to write that book now? Why was it important to get some of the contributors you've got? And if there was someone who's out there, like you were in the younger age, trying to hide that, trying to disguise it, trying to not let anyone see it, what would you be saying to them?
Unlock your potential with Success is a System. Join us every month for new episodes packed with strategies and insights to fuel your success journey. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and start achieving more.
So first of all, I was really fortunate. I happened to be spending some time with Sir Richard Branson. Him and I were cycling together, just the two of us, having a chat. And I was talking to him about ADHD, dyslexia, and in particular sleeping issues. Yeah. And he was giving me some wisdom and some advice from his own time and how he's got to become a better sleeper. But we started to talk about dyslexia and how, most books on dyslexia are written by academics and how stupid that is on the face of it. And a few days later, we were in the bar together, and I sort of said, you know what, I've been thinking about doing a second book. I might give this a go. And he was like, go for it. You should. So that was what planted the seed. I spent some more time on Necker Island thinking about it, going, I'm going to give this a go. But what I wanted to do, I didn't want to just tell my story. I didn't want to tell Richard's story. I wanted to tell a variety of people's story. I wanted diversity in sex, in race, in age. It's really easy to find 75-year-old white men tell you that dyslexia was okay, look at me.
Male, stale and pale, as they say.
It might be very different from, we featured a black farmer in the book, Wilfred. Wilfred emigrated here from Jamaica as one of 7 living in a 2-bedroom flat in Birmingham. Now, dyslexia for him took a completely different turn. It was a lot more difficult for him than it was for me being born white and British in Bethnal Green. Or we feature Chef Philly, who won MasterChef, and she come from an Indian heritage where education was so important. Nobody would listen to her. She's going, I think I'm dyslexic, and
she's a girl as well.
And she's a girl. They're saying, just try harder. And then Theopathetis coming here from Cyprus, having to learn a different language and being dyslexic and trying his way through. Theo is a great addition to the book. Kelly Hoppin's in the book. Sir Charles Dunstan. Sir Charles Dunstan had all of the privilege of what you might expect.
And these people were very happy, open to help, but you didn't have to bully him, cajole, or did you?
So I only knew one person before the book featured, who was Duncan Ballantyne personally. Right. Everybody else I reached out to cold. I said, look, you can't have any editorial rights because it's really important for me to give the reader your story. I want to tell your life story in a chapter, so it's going to be concise, but I need at least 4 hours of your time, up to 6 hours of your time. And only 2 people that I reached out to, I won't name them, came back saying they were too busy or not interested. Everybody else, completely cold, me reaching out to them, said, absolutely, would love to contribute. And it was amazing. I was spending time in their homes like I'm with you today, really getting beneath the surface of their childhood, that, the hardship of some of them. Some of them, Kelly Hoppin, how she got through into jail for a few days in South Africa, and really getting those stories and bringing them out and laying them bare for the reader to learn from.
And shame on the 2 people that couldn't make the time, because we can all find some time if it's something that's important to us, and if they've suffered themselves, they could make the difference to that 1 or 2 people. But great, the people that did give up their time. And a lot of people want to throw stones at people who have succeeded or have an amazing life and that, but they don't often hear or know the challenges they've been through. And I find that people who, certainly on my podcast, never ever paid anyone to be on podcast, people happily do, and we've been blessed with amazing people, and you're giving your time, and I appreciate that as well. You don't need to drive up here, come up here, give the time, but we can make a difference for somebody. And I do find that people who have had success generally want to give back. And I always reminded of the Churchill saying that we make a living by what we do, but we make a life by what we give. And my wife and I have always given 10% of any money we've made, plus a lot of time, every year, because I have this superstitious belief in that if I don't keep priming that pump, if I stop giving, I'll stop getting. And that's really important. But that adds more power to the book. It gives more reach to the book. And as I said, already seen Theo sharing that. But what was your aim? Was it kind of to have a bit of a biography in there and share other people's stories, or was it with a particular challenge that you wanted to overcome, or person or people you wanted to reach out to, or was it trying to talk to your younger self? Because we don't realize how often we go back and forward in time, looking into the future and like reliving the past in our mind.
Yeah, so for me, right, look, it was most people, the majority of people talk about dyslexia as a disability. And then there is a large sort of minority of people that are starting to talk about it as a superpower. And what I wanted to do is say it's probably neither, actually. Having dyslexia is an Achilles heel every day. Yes, it has loads and loads of benefits and strengths, but don't take away how hard, it's pointless just saying, if you're dyslexic, you've got a superpower, because then we might as well continue treating people as we've always done. That's not useful. I want to change how people think about dyslexia so that people get the support earlier on. But I also want companies and employers and others to recognize the power of dyslexic thinking. I'd like to see people start to employ dyslexic thinkers. Adverts going out on LinkedIn saying, I'm looking for a dyslexic thinker to join my executive team. We know that diversity makes up better teams.
Well, and there's certainly value in that, because I know that some of the points you make are that 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic, 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, and I do wonder if that's why they're so successful, or if because of their dyslexia they don't look at a traditional career, can't get into a traditional career, so they set up on their own, a bit like Neville. Got sacked from 14 jobs and thought, shit, I'm gonna have to do something myself. And employers are definitely missing out on something, because those people could be building amazing teams, countries, departments for those companies if they embraced it.
Well, look at, two things. Look at just dyslexic thinking in the past. Great innovations, light, flight, the iPhone. Dyslexic. If we're going to resolve climate change, it's very highly likely you'll be a dyslexic thinker that comes up with it, just because of the way they are wired. But going back to your sort of, 35% of entrepreneurs, 40% of self-made millionaires. I won't spoil the book, but we worked with a great professor at Cambridge University on some of the research that she's been doing over the past 11 years. And there's a strong research and evidence pointing towards the reality is there's two groups of people born in the world, both explorers and exploiters. And the explorers make up 15% of the population, and the exploiters make up the rest. Now, before 500 years ago, these explorers were out there finding new territories, food, and they would come back and they would be celebrated. Once we invented learning, which in the face of it, mainly by the church, because they were petrified of knowledge drain, we invented this thing called learning, and these 15% that were explorers simply were not able to pick it up the same way as the 85%. So later on, what do? We give the explorers the badge of dyslexia, give it some funding, and say we're doing something about it. But I believe, as along with Dr. Helen Taylor believes, that the reality is there's both explorers and exploiters. Dyslexia is nothing more than a convenient term to be given to a problem that we humans created ourselves. We invented a learning system that is suitable for lots, but not suitable for all.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably be very aligned should we go into how education in the way that it's delivered today fails more people than it helps, and so on. But I want to change for a little bit, because in a sort of encapsulated response, can you give us a simplified understanding of how the dyslexic brain works. What is it that's different, or how does it manifest in a few ways for people who have no idea?
Well, I think that the best way to describe it is to connect it to an explorer. Just think about if you look at all of the successful dyslexic traits and you look at the traits of an explorer, they match like for like. So you think about that, thinking about the bigger picture, that resilience, getting used to failure. An explorer would go out for weeks on end and not come back with anything. All of those traits perfectly adapt.
So it's the same sort of willingness to fail or acceptance they mind.
Risk taking, the energy to keep going, the willingness to fail. The thinking outside of the box. I mean, what dyslexic thinkers are great at is really cutting through the noise and getting to the point. I have to be careful sometimes because and people have to be careful when talking about dyslexia, because a lot of dyslexics also have ADHD, including myself. So it's quite difficult when you're talking about dyslexia to narrow it down to dyslexic traits only and not those of ADHD. So, but the reality is they do, a lot of them are
and I guess the stigma that historically, but still to some degree has been attached to it, probably leads to other mental health challenges, confidence challenges in some ways with some of them. But I want to pick up on that explorer piece, because one of the things I realized looking at your bio again is similar, although mine was, I would consider myself an explorer, but that was amplified when one of my mentors said to me, Mike, I want you to climb a mountain. And I said, I haven't got time for that. The business is growing like crazy. That's why I wanted to climb a mountain. He wanted me to create a distance, to be away from computer screens, away from the distraction, to really look at the business from afar, to get that perspective and so on. And then over years, he'd make me run marathons, long distance cycles, climb mountains. And I suddenly realized at some point, I went from doing a challenge like that every year to... And almost being bullied. He would say, if you don't do this, I'm going to bloody mentor you because you need to do it. And I'm not going to get into why, but you bloody need to do it. And afterwards, he would explain why, because he would interrogate me. What did I learn? How could you draw comparisons to life, to business, and so on? But and I suddenly realized, and this was only in recent years, that I wasn't being made to do it anymore. I was choosing to do it every year because I saw the benefits of it, and it just feeds my soul. And just 3 weeks ago, came back from climbing Kazbek on the Georgian-Russian border, and it was right on the edge of a foreign office red zone, and it was, people saying don't go and blah blah blah, and my daughter was saying, Dad, you're nearly 60, what are you doing that for? That's stupid. But still the need to do it. And I, looking at your bio, seeing that you've crossed oceans, climbed mountains, all of these things as well, and I did the Clip Around the World yacht race as well. I did 6 weeks at sea, but that was 6 weeks too long enough. But tell me where that came from, that need to do that physical explorer piece, the actual explorer piece, rather than the metaphorical or business or entrepreneurial explorer.
Yeah, well, I guess it's difficult to pinpoint it. I mean, obviously, if I was born an explorer, which I believe I was, then maybe that's what attracted me to the motorcycle team, or maybe it was the motorcycle team and learning to ride motorbikes and jump them over cars and through fire that led me to want to continue to take risks in life. Or maybe, it's just because I happened to meet certain people. One of my first ever big challenges actually was I went on a day skipper sailing course in Faro in Portugal. And that evening there was a guy on the course who was doing his instructor's course on the boat with me. And there was about 5 of us on the boat. Everyone went off for some drinks. And Mike said to me, do you fancy just having a bottle of wine up on deck and a chat? And I was like, yeah. And we spent that night together chatting. And he said to me, hey, I'm in next month, I think it was, a friend of mine's bringing a boat back from Antigua to the UK. Do you fancy doing it with us? We need a good, strong pair of hands on board. And I said, yeah. And then on that trip, I met someone who said,
you then competent crew as well with the day.
Yeah. And then I met someone on that trip who said, hey, we're going off to Tibet to do some trekking. Do you fancy coming with us? And your circle of friends start to include. And you're right, I've sailed across oceans, I've kayaked around countries, cycled from here to Italy, and I continue to do things every year. Actually, the reason that Sir Richard and I know each other is because I'm going to space with Virgin Galactic.
Fantastic.
So hopefully 2025, maybe 2026, that's going to happen with the Virgin team actually in December this year. We're trekking the UAE and doing a big open water swim. So, it's in my blood. I'm like you, want to do one every year. keeps me alive. Also, having 2 young daughters, I guess there's a bit of legacy stuff.
Do you understand why you want to do it, though?
Well, it just makes me feel alive, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing that makes me feel more alive than being on the edge of death, I guess.
Yeah.
So being in the middle of an ocean when you've got 45 knots of wind and 3, 4, 5 meters of waves for 4 hours.
And if something does happen, a lot of people don't realise, but there's probably hundreds of miles between you and another boat. And if something does happen, you're more likely to die than not die.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're too far for helicopter range and stuff like that. It's not going to be good.
It's interesting you talk about that kind of life or death, and I think if you're not really experiencing the proximity to death, not that you should pursue it, but you can never really appreciate life, and so it does become something. Because I said to my daughter, I said, "What if you were to die or something?" I said, "Well, look, I'm going to do everything I can not to. I'm with a team that have done it before, that do it regularly. I'm climbing with a guy that I've climbed with before. It's a mountain that's been climbed before.
Yeah.
So there's every reason why I should be safe. Although I didn't tell them that the day we got there, one of the senior guys was hit by lightning, thrown off the mountain and killed at the age of 38, and he was a very famous mountaineer. But what I was conscious of, and I then said to them, look, I have no intention of dying. I've done all of this checks. I've climbed before. I've got the right kit, blah, blah, blah. But if I did die, let's just say small risk. If I died, I've had a blast of a life.
Yeah.
And I would rather die fully living than live having never lived.
Exactly. I mean, I'm smirking because I was with a chap, a great guy, in the US recently, and somebody asked us together why we would take the risk of going to space, and mine was, I want to keep on exploring, etc., etc. And he said he was I think 66 now. He said, "Look, I'm 66. I've got grandchildren. I've achieved everything I want to achieve in life. If I blow up in space, what a great way to have gone." He said,
You won't be forgotten.
He's the history of legacies is that they only last 100 years and then they die out anyway. So I think it's something like only 1% of everybody's legacy exists after 100 years. He's like, mine will continue on because what a story. Granddad exploded in space. So there is an element. I mean, nobody wants to go and explode in space. I say that quite lightheartedly, but you've got to continue to push yourself. Although I've got a 7-8-year-old daughter now, you do start to question, well, how far do you go? Where do you go? What do you do? And that's just natural.
But you also want to be an example to them that everything has some risk attached to it, and you can't not live because of that.
Yeah, and that everything's achievable, that life is short, that you can, what you set your mind to, you can achieve. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a 2-bedroom flat in East London. I was really unfortunate for me. A lot of my friends went to jail. I lost a couple of friends earlier on from drugs and stuff like that. And so sometimes, when it's hard and it's gritty and you're freezing cold in a tent in the middle of nowhere, and you just think, well, there were other alternatives that weren't as nice as this, right?
But you appreciate them all the more for being in that position. But listen, time is running away with us, and I'm conscious that we try and keep these things to 40 minutes if we can. But I want to go back, and then I want to go forward.
Okay.
Going back, what would you say was the age at which you had most despair in life, or the biggest challenges?
15 to 16. I grew up in Bethnal Green. It was a violent place. People weren't getting beaten up. People were getting stabbed. And actually what was a big trend then was people would cut your face because they knew that you'd have to see yourself in the mirror for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And I remember really trying to dodge those situations. I got in a lot of trouble in pubs and stuff. I was a bit of a fighter myself when I was younger. And it was just horrible. I was trying to navigate. I really wanted out of Bethnal Green. I was too young to just pick myself up and leave. The imps, the end of your career was at 16 at the imps. So I was lost. And I was angry.
And with that comes so much fear and darkness, I guess.
Well, I was angry, right? I was angry that school had let me down. I was angry that I had to leave the imps. Like, why? That's all I had in life. I was now on my own. And I was working on building sites and stuff, so I was making some money, but I hadn't found a direction. So that was...
So I can see why that would be a dark time, but now you're a very successful man. Money won't be a problem, isn't a problem. You sell it, you got a great family dynamic, you're meeting amazing people, challenging yourself and helping others. If you could go back and have a chat like this with that 16-year-old self, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd mentor them if I could go back and chat to them. I'd let them know that you've got to leave, right? So the big turning point for me was I had to get out of Bethnal Green.
Yeah.
My surroundings were holding me back, but I wasn't brave enough to get out. So it took quite a dark event of a big stabbing in a pub in Bethnal Green, and I was there for me to make the decision to leave. And it didn't have to be that way. I could have made the decision a day before, a week before, a month before, but nobody told me that it would be okay.
And so you'd tell them it will be okay.
I'd tell them that it'd be okay.
And if your 16-year-old self could see you now, what do you think they'd say to you?
I think they'd be bloody surprised, actually, because, I've changed so much, right? I mean, I surprise myself sometimes, but I'm a devoted husband, I'm a devoted father, I'm a lifelong learner. I give everything I've got back to charities. I've just finished a 3.5-year stint as chair of the Prince's Trust Enterprise Network, which I set up and found on behalf of the Prince. And yeah, I would hope, if nothing else, that my 16-year-old self would be itching to try and get in the room to have a conversation with me, to be inspired by me, and that's what I hope to do for many others.
Well, and what a great sort of point to end on, in the sense that, even if you're in the darkest depths of despair, someone else would say to you, it can get better.
Yeah.
It'll be okay. But maybe you've got to get out of here. You've got to make different choices. And also that once you make a decision like that, you can become something that has no relation to where you come from.
Yeah.
And it isn't where you start, it's where you end up, and the journey along the way that makes the difference.
Absolutely. And, and on that point, I think it's really important. I think one of the reasons I was so successful in what I set up at the Prince's Trust was because people could relate to me. I could talk to prisoners about my upbringing and they could relate to me. So I think sometimes we don't need billionaires to motivate 15-year-old people from Peckham. It just feels unachievable for them. So anybody can motivate anybody. You don't need to be wealthy, famous. You can just be doing slightly better than the other person to motivate them or even mentor them.
No, and
a big message.
That's a really big message and an important point. I think that people who have achieved great success should give back. I think it's important to their self, but also to others. But often I say to people, if you're one step ahead of everyone else, you could be a mentor. And in fact, sometimes it can be more powerful, because if I'm at the top of the escalator, telling someone who's terrified of going on the escalator, it's okay. But if I'm there one step up and can say, look, come with me, and I'll hold your hand and I'll come with you, it's easier to reach out.
So I've never heard that analogy, but what a brilliant one. You're right. I mean, who are you more likely to believe? You're more likely to believe the person who's 2 runs up than the person at the top, because they're just a bit more, they're a bit more reachable, they're a bit more like you.
Well, and in mentoring, I try to use that, because I might say, Charlie Mullins literally left school at 15, didn't take any exams, sold for £146 million. He's going again at 73.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you see his energy, he's got more energy than a lot of 20-year-olds has. So you can do this if Charlie did it. And Charlie will say, if I could do it, anyone could do it.
Yeah.
But I then want to come in and say, but just this year, I've worked with some plumbers who have gone from 60 grand a year to 150,
Exactly.
or 150 to $1 million, or $1 million to 10 million, all of which is true, because I do a fair bit in the trade sector. Because Charlie is like a one-off icon. They might think he's lucky. They might think it was a different time. And so for so many reasons, even though they relate to his story and it's very inspirational, they can easily throw it away as, well, that was 30 years ago, or that was this.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's in this moment, 5 years older, one step up, they can believe it can be done. In fact, arguably, they can't say it can't be done.
Exactly. And I interviewed Charlie for my first book, Unsexy Business, and know Charlie well. But rolling Charlie out to a plumber or a tradesperson is a good rollout, right?
It is.
It's better than rolling Stelios out from EasyJet, for example, because they just don't believe it's achievable. So I think we all have the ability to mentor. Everybody has the ability to mentor. As I said earlier, my children mentor me every weekend to play more. Yeah. So you really don't have to be at the top of your
No, and they say the best way to learn is to teach. So, in that sense, I met a family actually in South Beach, Florida, and they had 12 kids and they homeschooled them. And I thought, shit, how can that be done? They were across quite a 20-year age range or something. And they were super intelligent, fantastically adjusted people. And I was chatting to the mum and dad, and I said, how did you do it? One was a teacher, one was a vet. And I said, how'd you do this? Because the teacher wasn't teaching at home, the kids were teaching. And I said, they said, with the internet, it's a lot easier. But even before that, with books, we would say, we want you to write 600 words on the Tudors or something. And they could research that, and they'd find that, and they had the time to do that. And then we'd say to the older ones, we want you to help them with that. And that was cementing their knowledge, and it was building a bond. There were so many good things. And the only thing that I think was missing was a degree of socialization. And I said, well, how about that then? That's important with school. And they said, well, actually, it is. And we recognize that. We socialize with people in our church. And their argument was that at least they knew there was a certain moral and ethical code that was going through that church. So, there's arguments on both sides of this, but it was a great indicator that those children were learning better from their brothers and sisters that were a couple of years older, and the brothers and sisters were cementing their own knowledge in a better way than maybe a traditional teacher that isn't allowed to teach the way they want to teach, probably because they've got to follow a curriculum but we're gonna have to bring today to a close. I'd love to come back and do a podcast with you when you come back from space.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a story? I'd love to share that. But is there any final things you'd like to say to the people who are listening here or watching on YouTube?
I think, Mike, look, if there's anybody watching or listening and they genuinely cannot afford a copy of the book but believe it will have a good impact on them or anybody they know, reach out to me. I'm not on all social channels. You can find me on LinkedIn on my website, which is just my name, and I will make sure they get a copy for free. This is really about helping others. It's not about selling books.
What a great and generous offer.
Such a message.
The Dyslexic Edge, Jamie Waller, thank you for your time. I found this fascinating. I learn every day that I speak with people who have achieved amazing things. I hope you got some benefit from it. If you did, please like, subscribe and share. And we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Success as a System.